Whether you are White Lotus-y or not, you would have some recognition, because it's impossible to look at the internet without seeing this, that one of the main guest groups of the season, Jacqueline, Kate and Laurie, high school friends who are now in their 40s, and they're all at the White Lotus because Jacqueline's paying. They're all at very different places in their lives. Jacqueline is an actress living in Hollywood. Kate is married to a rich dude and lives in Texas. And Laurie is a lawyer living in New York. And as Laurie says in the monologue that's getting all the attention for the finale, they go through life separately but still somehow together. Here's a little bit of Laurie's monologue from the episode about how being around these old best friends makes her feel.
I'm glad you have a beautiful face. And I'm glad that you have a beautiful life. And I'm just happy to be at the table.
During the course of this season, we've watched these women gush about each other, snipe about each other behind each other's backs, fight, make up. It's been a whole thing. And there have been lots of opinions about whether old friends like these are toxic or good for us or aspirational or stilting. A piece in the New York Times called Why Old Friends Bring Out Our Worst Teenage Selves argued that the trio illustrate the problem with old friends, and that's that no one ever changes. Alicia Haradasya Gupta writes, to many viewers, these details spotlight a common experience. Sometimes you regress when you're with the people you've known the longest. Being reminded of a long, tucked away facet of your personality can be one of the upsides of long-term friendship. But old friends can also bring back long-abandoned self-doubt and unhealthy patterns that can leave you with that ick feeling. Amelia, you're not watching this show, but do you relate to the stuckness of old friendships?
I really do. This year, I have both my 25th year university reunion and my 20-year high school reunion.
Are you a person who goes?
I love reunions because I'm just so curious to find out what everyone's up to and know all of their business. But there's something deeply confronting about it, and it goes to the heart of why my group chats with old friends are the hardest and the most fraught. And I think it's because there's always a sense of a gap between the person you were in that friendship when it started and when it blossomed and who you are now. And there's an element of your friends resenting you for that gap, but also you resenting them for not appreciating your evolution. So in a way, I disagree with the New York Times piece. I think the problem is not that you don't change. I think the problem is that everyone inevitably changes. Particularly at this point, by the time you get into your 20th year high school reunion, everyone's had significant and real challenges. And those have shaped you in ways that are profound. And there's a sense that with really old friends, you're screaming at them, I've changed, acknowledge how I've changed. But all they want to do is treat you like they treated you when you were 16.
And I've had this exact experience of feeling like I've had old friends trying to tie me to who I was. And I turn up going, I'm an adult with a job and I've got my car keys now and I've got a baby and like I'm an adult, and they want to see you as the 14-year-old pimply girl who had Leonardo DiCaprio on my wall and got, ghosted by boys on MSN or something.
But do they? Do they want to see you like that, or do you see that version of you reflected in them? You know what I mean? Because are they literally these old friends trying to knock you down a peg or two, or are you just always really conscious of the version of Jessie that they know about that all your new people don't know about?
I think there are two types. There are certainly friends who I have felt as though are trying to maybe knock me down a peg, and remind you of really sore memories that you're like, oh, I've actually not come to terms with that, or that's actually still kind of a little bit raw. And then there are others that you might show up, and I've had this experience of showing up and trying to kind of project this thing of success, and they're like, I can see through this bullshit. They're the ones who you'll stay friends with. Absolutely.
Well, and that's a fine line.
Yeah.
Someone saying, I can see through your bullshit, and someone knocking you down a peg is a fine line.
Yeah.
That old friends are always walking.
Yeah.
But isn't one of the glorious... So when it comes to these women on the White Lotus, right, I remember when they first walked into the hotel And they were in this sea of like gushing about each other. You look gorgeous. You look gorgeous. No, you look gorgeous. We're so lucky to be here. Blah, 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 which quickly began to crumble. And we all said, oh, they're not really friends. But by the end of this journey, I thought, no, they really are friends. Because the glorious thing about old friends is they do know all your secrets and they do know all your shit. And you don't have to pretend to be perfect around them because they know that you're really not perfect and you know that they're really not perfect, and there's like a freedom in that.
But do you ever feel a little deflated by that as well? I agree there's a freedom in it, but for instance, you came across the seas to Australia at a pretty young age.
I did.
When you catch up with friends who didn't make that enormous journey, back in England, do you ever feel like there's somehow a resentment there that you took yourself off and started a new life somewhere else? A tension even?
I don't think there's well, I'm sure there probably is in some ways. I remember feeling that really keenly when I first left Manchester. I remember we used to go home and I was studying in London, then living in London, and I'd go home to Manchester at Christmas, and there would be some people who you used to hang around with who would literally say, oh, you think you're all that now, you live in London. You know what I mean? Like literally say that to you. And I think that, and I remember being really shocked by that because I didn't think I was all that. Like, I'm not invested in thinking that I'm, special or have status or whatever. It's not really my thing. I'm more interested in like what's going on with you, because the truth of it is it's all the same. Like wherever you live or whatever, as you said before, Amelia, you've been through the same stuff. You've been through the relationship breakdowns. You've been through the crisis of health around your family. You've been through jobs that didn't work out, things that didn't happen. Like, I think that if you imagine that the role of female friendships is always just to sit around telling each other how great we are and how successful we are and how perfect we are, then we're missing the point. And I think that that's one of the things I thought about when I was watching these women, is because they were doing this sniping behind each other's back in some of the early episodes. And it was bitchy. But then at the same time, they're the people who are the ones who can say, I think she's drinking too much.
Yeah.
And I would rather that those people were saying that to each other than they were saying it out in the world. I don't know. They're my old friends, whether they're from England or from earlier in my life in Australia or whatever, they have all kinds of opinions about me not being perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah, I wondered too if it has a lot to do with how you feel about the version of you at 14. If you've not made peace with her yet, if you still carry shame and embarrassment and insecurity, because there's something so specific, I think, about the experience of being a teenage girl. You were your most insecure self, but so were all of the people you grew up with. And sometimes I have this friend that I saw recently, hadn't seen her in ages, and grew up with her. And I have flashes of things she said to me. Or like, and I'm in my mid-30s now. Like, why am I still? We're going back 20 years to a version I'm sure she wouldn't think was the best version of her, but I'm bringing all of that tension to the conversation. I think I'm reluctant in that episode and in that monologue, and she says time gives relationships meaning. And I've got friends that I've known since I was 5 and all through school, a very, very select few of them, but I'm also glad about the friends that I shed, because I don't think that time necessarily always gives relationships meaning. I really related to the New York Times article, the ick feeling. I can walk away and actually like shake it off and be like, ugh, I feel yuck after spending time with you.
And I can from friendships from different parts of my life that aren't necessarily that long ago, but you weren't in a great place, or you all bonded by bitching toxically about something, whether that's a job or a personal relationship. And that's certainly to be shed. But one of the things I thought about these women and this idea of Laurie's monologue about time brings meaning is, I think for some people it's your family who play that role of like, they know that you're not all that, right? But they love you anyway. But not everybody's family plays that role. And if your family doesn't play that role in your life, then it's your old friends ideally who do. They know all the mistakes you made. They know the flings you had that you shouldn't have had. They know the relationships that should have been flings. They know all the awful haircuts. They know that awful thing you said to someone, and they love you anyway. That is the ideal situation. And not everybody gets that from their family. So if you can get that from your old friends, and really these women in the end, they do. Like they might have their jealousies and their tensions, but I got the feeling that when they'd walk away from there, if anyone else tried to bitch to one of them about rich, famous Jacqueline, Kate and Laurie would be shutting them down. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I think that you're onto something there by bringing up family, because I think those old friendships start to feel like family in the sense that they're not as easy and they're often not as fun as your new friendships. They're almost, sometimes they don't feel completely optional. And when I think about, would I rather have a drink tonight with an old friend or a new friend? The new friend's certainly less complicated and certainly more breezy, and they're not going to ask me hard questions. During COVID, I went through a really hard time, as I'm sure billions of people around the world did, but I felt sort of uniquely aggrieved for a couple of reasons, some of which I've spoken about on this podcast and some of which are not my stories to tell. But I retreated into myself and my family because I felt that no one could really understand why my experience was so uniquely difficult. And at the time, it was interesting because the newer friends accepted that retreat and said, okay, well, I guess she's busy. But you know who's not going to accept a retreat, a self-pitying, wallowing retreat, is the old friends. Yeah. They're the ones who then send me the food deliveries and send me 3 texts in a row when they haven't received a response. So although I started off this conversation by talking about how the group chats with my old friends are my most fraught, I ultimately feel like it's shown me that the fraughtness is part of what makes it valuable.